All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, to talk about being you and defining your personal brand as it comes to your career. So, I'm Wendy Johansson. I'm a product design leader with 20 years of experience. And currently, I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Misalud for about the last 2 years. Right? Kind of underwhelming as an introduction. You're like, okay, who is this person? She's done a lot of things, but I've never heard of any of these things. Let's try that again when it comes to my introduction. Hey everyone, my name is Wendy Johansson. I've been a product design leader for 20 years across companies like Wiseline, which was a startup I co-founded, Amazon, and Publicis. I'm currently the co-founder and chief product experience officer at Misalud, a health tech company, and on the side, I mentor design leaders and executives. A little bit better when it comes to my personal branding. It gives you a better idea of who I am, how I am, and a little more context to kind of where my expertise lies. But let's try that one more time when it comes to my introduction and my personal brand. Hey everyone, my name is Wendy Johansson. I build equitable teams and products. I've built inclusive teams and practices at startups that I've co-founded, 2 so far, and I'm currently focused on closing the health equity gap for over 60 million Spanish speakers in the US with my latest startup, Misalud Health. So much better, right? When I'm introducing myself, I'm introducing my personal brand, and that's something that is incredibly important for all of us to be considering. Why do you want to care about your personal brand? It's because it helps you progress professionally and how you get your next job. So, how you introduce yourself and talk about yourself is your personal brand, and that impacts you not only in the space you're in right now, but your career as you go forward. So, Jeff Bezos once famously said that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's the perception. Whoops. It's the perception that people have of you in their own minds. Your brand reflects your experience and reputation. So if your brand is all these things, you definitely want to be shaping it. You want to tell that narrative of who you are, and you want people to understand kind of your elevator pitch of who you are, what you have to offer, and why you're here. So it's really incredibly important to think about this. So let's go through that again. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's what you lead with. It's that kind of feeling that you leave behind, that either feeling of energy or competency or excitement or kindness, whatever it is. It's what people say about you after you leave that room. It's how they think about you after that. It's forever in your mind. You're going to watch this talk and remember that was the girl who introduced herself 3 times and it got better each time, hopefully. And that's really the perception that you're going to have in your mind of me. And I think that's incredibly important is as mostly designers in this audience, oftentimes we forget to think about our audiences, our users, our customers when it comes to our day-to-day life. So when you're thinking about how people are perceiving you in industry, at a conference, at work, at a job interview, networking, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, whatever it is, just remember that perception lingers and you really have to know your audience to be able to talk about yourself. And then back to the final one, that brand that you exude out, it's your experience and your reputation. So incredibly important to think about these things. And that's basically what we're going to continue talking about today for the next 20-ish minutes. And then we'll move into some Q&A as we go forward at the end. So the Q&A might be 5 minutes, might be 10 minutes. Let's see how it goes. So here's what your brand is not, though, when you think about yourself. Your brand, it's not your story. It's not your CV. It's not your LinkedIn. It's not the years of experience you've had, how long you've been at your current job, what you studied. It is not your list of logos, X Facebook, X Google, X IBM, X whatever. Your brand is really kind of that CV that you don't want to repeat, because you know what, LinkedIn already tells that. Think of your CV and LinkedIn as the what you did and when you did it, and you need to talk about the story of you in terms of why What were the outcomes? What were the takeaways? What makes you human in that story other than a 2-year job period, a 3-year job period at these different companies? So here's how you should talk about yourself instead. You should think about highlighting your accomplishments. And when I'm talking about your accomplishments, yes, graduating university or a boot camp or a UX certification is certainly an accomplishment, no matter where you are in your career. But what we really want to think about is what you learned. So that can apply to younger, early career people, what you learned in school, what you learned in those programs. What is it that gave you a sense of knowledge? What did you take away from that in your own words? Or if you've been in your career for a few years, what have you learned at those jobs? Everyone knows if you're a product designer, for example, you did wireframes, you did usability analysis, you probably owned a little bit of the design system, you talked to engineers, but that's what everybody does at their jobs. So why don't you tell us what you learned at your job that's unique to you when you spent that time there? So highlight those accomplishments. Next, your promotion. At some point in your career, maybe you've gotten promoted, or maybe you're still early in your career and you're hoping to get there. But if you have been promoted, you were promoted for a good reason. Shine on the accomplishments that you had that really help you understand why you got promoted. Because you are a great dot connector. You are really fantastic at bringing that cross-functional team together to deliver that product. Or you did an exceptional job understanding the customer and leading a lot of research for a big project. What are those reasons you got promoted? I'm sure your manager has told you if you've been promoted. So shine on those accomplishments. Don't just kind of let that be that single moment in time where you got promoted to senior and that was it. Keep bringing that back up and use that as part of your brand and your story. You're an excellent communicator, you're an excellent researcher, whatever that was. Next, what big problems have you solved? So when I'm talking about big problems, I don't just mean you've redesigned the website for this e-commerce portal. I mean, what was the real problem there that you were solving? Why did that redesign need to come about? Maybe it's because people weren't buying products from that e-commerce website, and that's the problem you solved. So think about this in terms of the previous state that led to the design action in most cases, and then what problem you solved there. Redesign is not the problem you solved. That users were not buying something on this website currently is the problem that you did solve. So talk about that. Talk about it in frames of something a little more broad and personal to that situation that really comes off as a differentiator in your brand. What impactful products you've designed? This one, some of us may look at people at big companies like Facebook, Google, whatever, and say, well, they're working at such huge companies, they must do really great things there. But the question I would really push on is, what impactful products did you change while you were there? If you were at Meta, which I keep accidentally calling Facebook, if you were at Meta, what are those problems and those products that you change? How did it impact that entire ecosystem? Did you create connections for people, for example, to be able to check in after an earthquake or major world event on Facebook? I think we've all seen that on Facebook, where you can say, check in as safe after this earthquake, which several have happened in the last week all over the world, in Taiwan and in Mexico. So if you design that product, it helps people see that you were safe during some sort of kind of big natural event, maybe while telephones are down and people couldn't reach you. That's something really impactful. You help create a service where people can understand that their loved ones are safe without having to reach out and respond to the same people repeatedly. So reframe kind of the impact of those things that you've designed, because that's part of your brand. It shows that you care about people, hopefully, and it shows where your excitement and energy come in the things that you've done in your accomplishments. Next, why does it matter to the world? So why does it, being you, the things you've done, your career, highlight that accomplishment? So why does your being a product designer in Southeast Asia right now, after graduating from a boot camp, why does that matter to the world? Is that an exciting time in industry where there's going to be a lot more focus on product design and creating more usable digital products? Maybe, maybe not. Think about kind of the bigger impact of why does what I do matter to the world, and what is it that I have in my brand, in my experience, in my reputation that's unique? So you can think about it that way, or you can think about it more one-to-one. Why does this matter right now to the person I'm talking to? So as an example, why does your personal brand matter as someone who is attending the ADP list Be More Festival? Well, you're all here because you've heard of ADP list, you like design, and you're very interested in networking, getting mentorship, reaching out and kind of seeing the wonderful global community that is ADP list. So with that person you're talking to, who is you right now when I'm talking to you, your personal brand really matters in differentiating yourself and telling a bigger story other than, hey, I'm Wendy, I'm a product designer. What kind of product designer? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I build equitable teams and products, and that is my focus. And so that's something super important as you continue to think about yourself. Highlight your accomplishments, find the ways to kind of differentiate and talk about that. Now, another way to continue to think about yourself and your personal brand is sharing your Ikigai. So Ikigai is a Japanese concept for reason of being. And that reason of being is kind of highlighted in these 4 big outer circles: what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And when you have the intersection of all those 4 things, you have found your Ikigai. So the intersection of these things is how you impact the world. Your Ikigai helps you build your unique personal brand. So I'll give you an example, and a very personal example, one at that. I'm speaking at this conference with other amazing design leaders from companies like Google, IBM, and Webflow. Super incredible. I love these companies. I love the work that they've come out with. I love where they've sat in the design leadership space for the last 20 years. I know Webflow isn't 20 years old, but IBM back in the day, and then Google, and now Webflow, really just kind of changing that design landscape. So when I think about that, I kind of sit here and think like, well, nobody's heard of my companies. When I say Wiseline, the startup I founded in 2013, when I say Misalud Health, the startup I founded last year, probably you haven't heard about it. And it does really bring this kind of feeling of imposter syndrome to me, even though I know I've had other big accomplishments. I know I've built companies. I know I've built teams of hundreds and thousands of people, but it still feels really small because nobody's heard of my brand globally. And so what really helps me is, instead of focusing on the brand power, yeah, one time I worked at Amazon and I worked at Publicis. Maybe you've heard of those 2 companies. But instead of focusing on that brand power, where I spent about a year at each of these companies, I decided to become more comfortable with focusing on my mission in life, my reason for being, and having the freedom to pursue that in my leadership roles. So let me tell you about my Ikigai as I kind of describe my personal brand. I found what I'm good at, which is leading teams and leading people and building great products by enabling those teams, whether they are designers, product managers, or engineers. I found that I can be paid for that as a design leader and as a product leader, and currently also as a general overall product experience leader. Within my company, we call it product experience because it also encompasses our engineering team, who reports to me. So it's cool. I'm doing what I'm good at. I'm getting paid for it. And it's also what I love, because what I find at core is I love enabling people. I love giving people the opportunity because I see potential rather than a perfect checklist of all the requirements that everybody else is looking for. So I love hiring people who seem like half of what I need and have the capacity to learn and grow very quickly. And so I think that's incredible to be able to be doing what I'm good at, what I can be paid for, my profession, but also what I'm good at and what I love, which is my passion, and being able to have kind of a big intersection of that. Now, when I look at that as, is this something the world needs? Yeah, sure, there's bigger problems in the world that I could be helping address, but I don't think I have a personal impact on world hunger or peace. But instead, I take a look at this. Can I be building companies and teams and products that enable the world to be at a better place? Yes. Does that intersect with what I can be paid for, which is my vacation? Yes, it does. Does that intersect with doing what I love, a mission? Yes, it does. And so, with all of these things rounded together, I find that I have my Ikigai, which is building equitable teams and products that can be impactful to the world. So, I challenge you to think about this. What's your Ikigai? How are you going to share your journey as you move forward to the world? And how are you going to speak about your passions that'll land you in unexpected places? So, another mini story here. My background actually largely is in building those teams and products. But along the way, I've always had kind of a nights and weekends passion project. Back in 2016, I started that passion project and it was called Wise Line Academy. I was teaching free UX courses on nights and weekends with some of my team members to our local community in Guadalajara, Mexico. So back then, human-centered design, UX wasn't really a focus. It was very rich in graphic design, visual arts. And so in all of those nights and weekends, I was able to probably teach about 75 to 100 people in the local area, in the local community, to think not just design, but to think human-centered design, user-centric design, and help them kind of elevate their career and be able to move forward with those trends in, at the time, UX and then into product design. I did the same thing when I was at Amazon. I've built more or less the same program to ungatekeep access into design in a big tech company. And then I did the same thing at Publicis Group, where I built out and reframed a early careers program to start looking at non-traditional backgrounds and really changing the face of what design looked like in an agency to be a lot more human-centric. So what was really interesting and unexpected for me is as I interviewed for new jobs in 2020, I could talk about all the products I built because, you know, with your portfolio, you got to talk about products you built and teams you built and people you built. But where I really lit up in my interviews was really talking about my passion for building these equitable programs for people to enter new careers in tech. The recruiters, the interviewers, they heard it over and over again from me when they asked, you know, what are you most proud of doing from these previous companies? And although I was interviewing for a director of product design role, for example, at one of these companies, what they heard was, you have a passion for something that we're kind of interested in building in our company. How about rather than continuing to interview for this product design leadership role, we bring you in to build an equitable design program instead? Because they saw my passion and they found a fit for me. And so from then on, it kind of became more natural to me to start thinking about my personal brand as something that I just love to do, be able to speak about it passionately. And going back to my introduction again, hi, I'm Wendy Johansson. I build equitable teams and products. I've built inclusive teams and practices at startups I founded. I've built those same teams and ungate kept access to design and tech at big companies like Amazon and Publicis Group. And I currently am focused on closing the health equity gap for 60 million Spanish speakers in the US with my new startup, Misalud Health. So that is my personal brand. That is my reputation. That is how I approach the table when I talk to anyone. It's something I'm comfortable with, even if I'm going to mostly engineering event. This is who I am. Even if I'm going to a design conference, this is who I am. I'm not here to talk to you about design tools or product or you know, how to dive in the best new methodologies. Instead, I'm here to talk to you about your personal brand. I think that learning to define yourself, thinking about your own brand and the audience that's going to receive it is really a big game changer for you as you move forward in your career. So our personal brands allow us to differentiate ourselves. They allow us to articulate our unique value proposition. What can you do that is very unique to you, very unique to your skills, and maybe nobody else has it, but maybe just very few people have it. And that's incredibly important because if you think about it, if we all just introduce ourselves as product designers, well, We're all product designers. We all know how to use Figma. We all know how to do some user research here and there. We know what design systems are. We know the latest patterns and trends. How are we different from each other? What are we passionate about? What makes us a little more accomplished or experienced in certain areas than other people? You all know the Queen, not the Queen of England, but the Queen, Beyonce. She has a personal brand. Her personal brand revolves around empowerment. It revolves around knowing who she is, being that strong woman up front. Even though she's married to basically her equal in terms of music and industry, Jay-Z, Beyonce is never referred to as Jay-Z's wife. She's just the Queen Bey. We know that. That's building a personal brand that stands alone. And I use this example because I think she's fantastic, but also think about that and how that resonates. Same thing if you think about other kind of powerful women in music. Lady Gaga, she kind of has that same kind of empowerment, inclusivity, accepting anyone, that vibe going on with her personal brand. Next, our famous friend, Steve Jobs. He brought his personal brand, and it wasn't just being a super tough guy to work with, which we all heard about in the later days post Apple and after he passed, but he brought in this personal brand of being innovative, pushing harder, pushing outside the box. Rather than developing another laptop, another computer, he said, I have redesigned the phone. The telephone and the mobile phone as you know it is no longer. It is now the internet in your hands. So thinking differently rather than trying to solve exactly the problems that everybody has, he was able to kind of broaden both his brand and Apple's brand. And quite frankly, for the longest time, Apple and Steve Jobs' brands were incredibly intertwined. Successful, different, usable, modern, young, all of that kind of came to play. But definitely in innovative is how we think about that. So, other thing to be assured of, if you are not branding yourself, others are doing it for you. If you are not defining what kind of product designer you are, what kind of product manager you are, what kind of, early career person you are and what you're aspiring to do, people are making it up in their heads for you. They're placing labels on you. So if you don't label yourself in that way, you might lose track of your own reputation. So that's also another reason that really focusing on your personal brand is incredibly important. So I leave you with this short talk and hopefully inspire you to think about your own personal brand, how you might frame yourself. There's plenty of workshops out there about personal brand. But really, this was to start getting you to think about, how do I talk about myself? How do I put myself out there? How do I grow my personal, professional brand in my career as I move forward? I mentor so many people coming in from different industries, different regions, different stages in their career. And whenever they're ready to go interview for another job, the first thing I ask them for is, okay, pitch me. Who are you? And they're not ready for it. They're not ready to tell a story. And it's the same thing with their LinkedIn, with their portfolio, their resume. If you're not ready to talk about why you, out of thousands or hundreds of applicants in every situation, then you're already at a disadvantage. You sound like everybody else. You have the same portfolio, you have the same language. Tell us why you're different. Tell us what you're passionate about. Tell us what you've accomplished. Tell us who you are and name who you are so that we don't name you for you. There's a phrase, at least in the US, it's a brand new world. And I'd like to actually tell you instead, it's a brand you world. Try not to be too cheesy here. Anyways, that is it for my short talk, hoping to inspire you a bit to think differently. We are opening up to Q&A over here. And I believe my host is going to jump back in. Oh, here we are. Sayera asks us, what's your advice on how to be more articulate and confident when talking about your experience and personal brand? My own personal advice, you kind of saw my opening intros, like Hey, I'm Wendy, I do these things. Like, oh, hey, I'm Wendy, I do these things. And then, hey, I'm Wendy, I do these things. Part of it is to genuinely find that passion of something you're excited about, to bring it in how you talk about yourself. And that's why I brought up the Ikigai concept. A lot of folks, when they're thinking about your personal brand, they're thinking, big brandy words. And I'm like, no, talk about what you're passionate about. Because when you're passionate about it, it naturally comes through. Just like in my example about when I interviewed for new roles, I was like, yeah, I did all this product stuff. I built these teams, cool. But when they asked me, like, what are you most proud of? I was like, oh, let me tell you what I'm most proud of. Like, the energy and passion comes out. So that's how you become more confident in talking about yourself. When it comes down to more articulate, just got to write it down. As an example, I didn't work on slides for this talk until last night. I actually just wrote this entire talk out as bullet points. That's how I think. I'm articulating those thoughts and seeing if the flow of the conversation seems to make sense. And once it did, I looked at it and said, okay, what are the pull out points that kind of have visuals to go with it? So think about writing. It's a powerful tool. If we cannot, in writing, articulate ourselves and review it later and say, yeah, actually, that makes sense. It's simple. Then we're probably not ready to say it either. So hopefully that helped. So let's see. Next here, Angie asks, if you're transitioning to a career in UI UX design, how would you introduce yourself when your portfolio is going to feature design that you created, but is not necessarily tied to a project or company? This is actually something that I saw when I ran a lot of these kind of early career, transitional career, or apprentice programs. A lot of people wouldn't have a traditional UX portfolio. Instead, they would show things like, hey, I have been designing t-shirts for my friends' bands ever since I was in high school. Or I've been designing all the flyers for my churches for the last couple of years. Or I have been designing posters just for fun. And, I dabble on these things in the side. Show what you have and just call them your passion projects, your side projects. Let people know that's just what you've done on the side, because it's really great to see when someone does have a passion for design outside of the actual UX career. So I think it's a benefit to show that. And Loisel says, as a fledgling UX design, I can't say that word, as a new UX designer, is it better to be a Jane of all trades, or is it better to seem specialized? It is always better in your early career to be kind of a generalist, because think about it this way. As a generalist, you really get to explore the entire journey of creating a product in design. And you may find yourself more curious about some parts of the journey and more tedious about some other parts. So it helps you understand where you should specialize. I think when you're specializing too early, based off education or theory rather than practice, you can lead yourself down a path that later you find it's not energizing, it's draining to do that. So in the early part of your career, be able to do everything, so that as you grow, you can say, you know what, that's the thing I really love. Like, I want to wake up in the morning and talk to users all day long. And thus maybe I started in Figma, but I find that maybe my career path takes me down to research. So give it a go, at least for a year, and see what energizes you, that you feel like, no, I want to volunteer for that work, even though I already have work, because I just love doing that. And then Bofale asks, how do you deal with imposter syndrome, especially when you're hired for a role that required more experience than you have? Well, the first thing is to know the secret of job descriptions. We all make them up. Like, okay, I'm a hiring manager. I don't think I have written a net new job description in like 10 years. When I write job descriptions, I am often copy and pasting from old job descriptions that I've written in the past, things that I'm inspired by that I see out in other companies. And that's my first part of the response, telling you that just because It requires you to have all these bullet points and bullets in a checklist. It doesn't mean you need to have that. It just means as a hiring manager or recruiter, that's what we put in there because we would ideally like people to have that. But we still hired you. Even if you don't have all of those things to pat down, you still ace that interview. You impressed with your personal brand, with your portfolio, with your conversation, and you are there now. So once in a while, when you're feeling that imposter syndrome, remember, like, hold on, but I made it. They knew I didn't have all of that. And now that I'm here, maybe I can take a look around. And it looks like it says you're at IBM. You have a design team around you. Find those people who are experienced in those things that you're not feeling as comfortable with and go talk to them. Maybe you can find a mentor internally from that. Or, of course, you can go back to ADP list and find a mentor in those things. But just remember, they hired you. You did not lie your way there. They very well knew where you had strengths and gaps, and they thought you were the right fit for the team. So on those really bad days, remember, stand up, I don't know, put your hands on your waist and say, yeah, you know what? I passed that interview process on my very own. I'm here now. I can do this, but I should also go ask for help. So you don't have to do it alone. And then Smith says, what would you tell people to focus on as a starting point in personal brand journey? What should be the highlight point, journey or accomplishment? If you're going to start with thinking about your personal brand, my recommendation is 100% start with your elevator pitch. If you go Google elevator pitch template or how to make an elevator pitch, there will be plenty of articles telling you about like how to do an elevator pitch for a product. Your reputation, your experience is your product. You're a human being, but your personal brand is your product and how you talk about it. So start with an elevator pitch about yourself. Let's go back to the one I threw out. Hi, I'm Wendy Johansson. I build equitable teams and products, and I have done that across big companies, small companies, and the companies I founded. Great. That's my elevator pitch about myself. What that tells you is what I excel at. You can hear the passion in my voice, but also what I have experience in. So that's kind of your elevator pitch. Like literally, you are in the elevator with who is a really famous design leader? I don't know these days. I don't know. With Steve Jobs somewhere in magical land, and you have like 5 seconds to tell him, like, dude, Steve Jobs, this is who I am. That's your elevator pitch. You want to get that down pat. So I'd say start there. And when you're talking about your highlight point, your journey, or your accomplishment, it depends. If you're earlier in your career, I would say talk about your journey because it can show me your passion for design, for the industry, and why you decided to come here and where you came from. But if you've been around in industry for a while, you got a few years under you, talk about your accomplishments. Don't forget, you got promoted at some point, probably. Like that's going to tell you how you talk about your accomplishments. There are things that you've accomplished, even if you and your imposter syndrome sometimes forget that. Lauren asks, does your personal brand develop itself over time, or do you need to proactively shape it? It can develop over time, but you do need to shape it. So think about it as kind of a big snowball. You can direct where the snowball goes, but it's still going to go, but you can kind of course correct it. So, for example, before I had a solid definition of kind of my personal brand of building equitable teams and products, I also like to talk about myself often as like, well, I'm a truly global design leader. I've had teams in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Mexico, in India, in Europe, in Dubai. Like I can run teams globally and remotely, and I know the power of that, especially now during COVID. Now, like a few years ago. And so that's the story I was telling back then was you need somebody who knows how to lead your teams during this really tough time. And I can do that. And so as that continued to shape, I realized like the whole global leader thing, like I didn't really want to talk about that anymore. And it was kind of building of like, oh, you've done teams and cultures all over the world. But I wanted to shape that back to reshaping, bringing in that global aspect and talking about it as equitable, inclusive teams. And so I did a little bit of shaping to get back there. And I think it depends on what you're comfortable with and what you're most passionate about. And Natalia says, what is your advice for those who do not yet have professional experience to account the accomplishments you're mentioning? Yes. I think 2 questions back, I had kind of pointed out, if you don't have those accomplishments yet early in your career or just starting your career, tell me about your journey. Last week, I spent half an hour chatting with somebody that a university friend introduced me to. And this woman is a lawyer, attorney, and she's been an attorney for the last 15 years. But she really, really wants to get into UX and get her full-time role in UX because in all of her work as an attorney, she has been really thinking about the humans, the users behind it, and bringing kind of a more human-centric process to her work as an attorney. And although she doesn't have that much UX experience, I looked at her as this amazing person of like, wow, you've been an attorney for 15 years. Like, here are all the different ways you can get started in your new UX career. You can look at legal tech companies. You can look at companies that have complexity of a lot of data that needs to be detailed and analyzed. You can look at companies that have a lot to do with writing because a lot of your skills kind of sit around reading, writing, comprehension in all those times you were a lawyer and an attorney and doing all these docs. So look at things like Grammarly or like Notion or Medium. So there were so many kind of connections I was able to kind of pull back in of you came from somewhere, whether it's a career before or not, even if it's something you studied, even if you're just brand new and you're, let's just say, out of a boot camp and you're 20 years old, there's something that you've done along your journey where you can kind of pull it back in to say, my journey is unique. I've had these experiences and I'm able to find, some extra value to you as compared to other designers. And Gait says, what is your advice on branding yourself when transitioning careers, especially when you have a myriad of multidisciplinary experience? So I'm going to assume when you say multidisciplinary with transitioning careers, I'll make up an example in my head. You are coming from an engineering background, for example, and now you want to get into design or marketing background or retail background, whatever that might be. Kind of like with the story I just shared, find those connectors. Look at the types of companies, for example. If you come from an engineering background, look for those types of companies that have really tough engineering design problems to solve. As an example, GitHub, Google Cloud, AWS. They're developing things for other engineers. You have unique insight as an ex-engineer, now designer, who wants to design things. Or if you're coming in, let's just say from being a retail service associate, maybe you're working at a Sephora or something like that. Well, bring in your either focus on beauty, so the industry, or you're focused on the types of problems that you solved while you were there, which is one-to-one human consultation. Look at things that can be related to that. So for example, if I did meet somebody who said, well, I only worked at Sephora for the last 5 years selling makeup and beauty products, and now I'm a UX designer. I've gone through all my certifications. I'm super excited to get this going. I would kind of look at that person as, I run a health tech company, and how we service our patients is the most important thing to us, our customer service with our patients, both on the kind of customer service side, but also the medical side. So I might look at this person from Sephora as, that's a really good opportunity. You know what good customer service looks like. So you're able to maybe bring something from that retail and customer service perspective into my company that we haven't thought about before. So find the connectors. I'll take one last question and then we're right up against time. How can you give an elevator pitch without it sounding rehearsed? You rehearse it first until you memorize it, until it's burned in your memory. And then after that, you start telling your friends because your friends don't care. Then you tell your mom definitely doesn't care. And then you go tell like all your aunties and uncles and whatever, like they don't care either. But then that makes it come out more naturally. It's not practice. It's not those big words anymore. You're just telling a bunch of people, yeah, this is me. This is what I do and who I am. And then it's more natural. So you first got to memorize it, and then you got to tell all the people who love you, but just don't care what you do, because that's going to help you make it a lot more natural and a lot more normal when you talk about it. All right, there we are. We're up against our time. Thanks so much for joining. You can check me out on social media. Follow me, UX Wendy, on Twitter, and continue your own personal journey. And it sounds like a lot of you are getting started in your careers in design. Differentiate yourself, that you all have your unique values, and believe in yourself, because somebody out there, I believe in people starting their new careers here. Have a good one.